Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
Do you stand by this president dangerously staying in office?
House Democrats introduce an article of impeachment that's 9 days ahead of Inauguration Day. What this move could mean for President Trump.
After Twitter suspends Trump's account, what role does social media have in the free speech conversation?
But I'll work with whoever gets elected as Speaker.
Turmoil in the Illinois House as Speaker Michael Madigan announces he's stepping back in the leadership race, but not entirely. We're live in Springfield.
We need to build this path forward, and we've started with that today.
The latest on Chicago Public Schools reopening, which saw some students back in the classroom today for the first time in 10 months.
Why some CPS families say language barriers are creating tech problems for their children.
What we know about the Boeing jet that crashed this weekend in Indonesia, and other news from Cranes.
This is the first year that our customers will see a notable benefit of this project.
A makeover on the north side of the Red Line is well underway. We've got the latest on the CTA's progress.
There's now Trubisky launching it right back to Wibbs, and he drops a touchdown.
And the Bears' season ends with a thud in New Orleans as Chicago's anemic offense fails to fire against the Saints. But first, some of today's top stories. State health officials in Indiana confirm that the more contagious variant of the novel coronavirus first discovered in the United Kingdom has been found in Indiana. Illinois' top doc Ngozi Ezike says it is likely already in the state, circulating in such few numbers that it has yet to be detected, and warns of what that means in the future.
The significance of us knowing that it's going to be here, is already here, is that with time, as it did in the UK, it will predominate and be the dominant strain. And that would only take, a few months. So potentially in March, we could have this new variant be the majority of our cases, and that means that we will have more infectious spread.
This comes as Illinois health officials announce another 4,700 new cases of COVID-19 and 53 additional deaths. The state's total case count is more than 1,033,000, as 17,627 people have died. The case positivity rate in Illinois is 8.9%. A supermajority of Chicago aldermen are calling for the ouster of Chicago Police Union President John Catanzara. In a resolution signed by 35 aldermen, the group notes that the union's own bylaws bar membership to anyone who supports the principles of any organization whose purpose is to overthrow the U.S. government by force or violence. Last week, Catanzara told WBEZ that he understood the frustration that led to Wednesday's riot at the U.S. Capitol and said there was no looting and very little destruction of property. He has since apologized for those remarks. Find out which aldermen and other city officials signed on to the letter by visiting our website. And now to Paris and various calls for President Trump to be removed from office. Paris.
That's right, Brandis. House Democrats introduced an impeachment resolution today charging President Trump with incitement of insurrection after the storming of the Capitol. Tomorrow, the House will vote on a measure calling on Vice President Mike Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment against Trump. If Pence does not do so, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi plans to continue with impeachment proceedings as early as Wednesday. And joining us to discuss the legal and political ramifications of this are Laurel Harbridge-Young, a political science professor at Northwestern University. Her research focuses on partisan conflict and the lack of bipartisan agreement in American politics. There's a lot of that right now. And David Franklin, a constitutional law professor at DePaul University College of Law. He served as Illinois Solicitor General from 2016 to 2019 and clerked for Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg in '99 and 2000. Welcome both of you back to Chicago Tonight. First, David Franklin. House Democrats have called on the Vice President to invoke the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump. Remind us how that would work.
Well, the 25th Amendment was designed for situations where the president becomes unable to fulfill the duties of his office. For example, in case of a medical emergency. It's even been invoked in certain circumstances where the president has gone under anesthesia for operations and the like. But in this case, the idea would be that it would be invoked involuntarily, as it were, and that would require the vice president and the majority of the cabinet to invoke it. and then the president would be able to go to Congress to see whether 2/3 of the Congress would ratify that decision. It sounds like it's unlikely. It sounds like Vice President Pence is reluctant to invoke the 25th Amendment.
That's certainly,
I wouldn't expect that to happen.
That's certainly what the reporting is. And then you have all these acting secretaries in the cabinet, which is kind of fuzzy as well. So assuming that doesn't happen, House Democrats did introduce an article of impeachment against the president today. The resolution says in part, quote, Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States. Laurel Harbridge, why impeach the president with only 9 days left in his term?
So I think that the most important reason to do it is to show that there's accountability for his actions. So whether or not he is actually physically removed from office before his term ends and the presidential transition occurs, I think it's really important to show that our democratic institutions are stronger than the pressure he has put on them to overturn a free and fair election. And I worry that without any accountability, this could become a political norm, that any losing candidate who's unhappy with the election simply tries to prevent the certification of votes, encourages his supporters to overturn a free and fair election. And that's not the way our democratic institutions should work.
And it's certainly a situation that's truly destabilized the United States democracy right now. David, there's even talk of holding the impeachment trial in the Senate after Biden is sworn in. Again, why do that if the president is out of office, at least other than to hold him accountable for wrongdoing?
Well, first of all, we're in uncharted territory here. Let's be clear. This is not normal. We've never had a president who's actively encouraging a violent mob to storm the Capitol to try to overturn the results of a free and fair election. And the question of whether the president's impeachment proceedings could continue after he left office is also one that's unsettled. There are a few possible precedents involving lower level executive officials from the 19th century. But the basic idea is that the Senate, in addition to removing the president from office, could also, in a separate vote, disqualify him from holding office in the future. And so the idea, which is, I think, controversial among legal scholars, but not implausible, is that the impeachment proceedings would not become moot, as it were, when the president leaves office, because that additional disqualification step would still be on the table.
And that additional, barring any future public office for the president, would only require a simple majority, not a 2/3, as I understand. Laurel, what are the political implications of impeaching the president, both for the president himself, the Republican Party saying, you know what, this isn't going to be good for unity if you do this, and the Democratic Party? Do they have some kind of political backlash if they go forward, or political backlash if they don't go forward?
Right. So I think, in my view, best case scenario for the country would be if there was bipartisan agreement on the impeachment of the president, that the country and both parties said that this is unacceptable behavior, this is not how our democratic institutions work, and they go forward together. Assuming that that does not happen, I think the Democratic Party is taking the risk that in the short term that they're seen as inflaming partisan tensions. It may even hurt with kind of Biden's cabinet nominees, his early kind of legislative aims that he might want some bipartisan support on. But they're taking some risk there. But I think it's ultimately for the good of the country in terms of holding President Trump accountable. In terms of the Republican Party, I think you're absolutely right in what you alluded to, that this definitely risks showing divisions within the Republican Party. We've already seen that Trump, his sons, and others have said that if you're not with the president here in terms of overturning the election, then you should be primaried and you should be out of the party. I think one of his sons said it's not your Republican Party anymore, it's Donald Trump's Republican Party. And this will certainly highlight divisions there. And certainly, members like Romney, Lisa Murkowski, Pat Toomey, others who may be more likely to support it.
Certainly there are strong divisions there in the party. David Franklin, the situation right now in Washington is just remarkably unstable. Just in the last few hours, the acting Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, steps down. You have so many acting secretaries. You have so many threats of violence after this horrible situation last week. What concerns you about this going forward the next 9 days and even beyond?
Well, I think we have a fundamentally broken politics in this country. You know, when the framers of the Constitution designed the impeachment power and the other checks and balances that we justly celebrate as part of their constitutional design, they didn't anticipate the kind of hyper-partisanship that we have today, where rather than defend its own institutional prerogatives, Congress, who literally just saw its building stormed at the behest of the head of the executive branch, rather than defend its prerogatives, it's very unlikely, I think, that the Senate would convict and remove the president, even for what is obviously impeachable conduct. So we have a situation in this country where our politics is basically dysfunctional, and where our media ecosystem, outside, of course, of the safe precincts of public television, is broken too, where you've got tens of millions of people believing absolutely fantastic and untrue conspiracy theories, and then acting on them, some of them anyway, in this unprecedentedly violent way. I wish I had a simple solution, but the problem, I think, is clear.
It's a multi-pronged problem. We'll have to leave it there, but we hope to have you on soon to continue talking about this. Our thanks to Laurel Harbridge-Young and David Franklin. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And on tomorrow's program, members of Congress will join us to share their thoughts on impeachment and more. And now back to Brandis and the latest from the state capitol. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. There are only a few days left before a new class of Illinois legislators are sworn into office, which means there are only a few days before a vote on who will lead the House. Current Speaker Michael Madigan issued a stunning statement earlier today that throws an even greater wrench into the race. Amanda Vinicky joins us now from the Illinois Capitol. Amanda.
Brandis, it'd be hard to live in Illinois and not at least know of House Speaker Michael Madigan. He has held that position of House Speaker for nearly my entire lifetime. And in those nearly uninterrupted 36 years, he has amassed a lot of power. And not all that long ago, it would have been unfathomable to imagine him being forced to give it up. But that may well be where we stand, as Madigan this morning releasing a statement saying he is suspending his campaign for a 19th term as Speaker of the Illinois House, but he is not withdrawing from the race. I have always put the best interest of the House Democratic Caucus and our members first, he said in a statement. The House Democratic Caucus can work to find someone other than me to get 60 votes for Speaker. So you may be wondering, what on earth is the point of stop lobbying to get votes but still continuing a campaign? Well, the answer there, that it creates chaos to Madigan's advantage as Democrats jockey, bully each other up, trying to get enough support. Just key in there on the last part of his statement is as if he is issuing a challenge to Democrats. I dare you to find somebody else who can secure those 60 needed votes. He may not have them, but nobody else even comes close. I kind of think of it like a kid who has strict parents, want them to eat healthy, forbid them to have any sweets, and then at some point say, hey, child, go for it, have all you want, and then the kid maybe gorges himself and comes up with a bellyache. Madigan is sort of hoping that Democrats will get a political bellyache and then come running back to him. House Republican leader Jim Durkin says that this move is typical Madigan. With 36 hours left before the swearing in of a new General Assembly, Michael Madigan continues to create uncertainty and misdirection. Madigan's suspended campaign appears to be another ploy or a head fake. For the sake of the institution, his caucus must demand that he be direct and honest about his intentions, in or out. Governor J.B. Pritzker, who, like Madigan, is a Democrat, was more laid back in his reaction.
As I have said many times, I will work with whoever the members of the House of Representatives elect as their Speaker. Choosing the Speaker is the sole responsibility of those representatives, and it is clear that the members are taking their choices seriously.
The governor says he did speak with Madigan just a couple of days ago. Pritzker is pushing for a bill that would save the state about $200 million by stopping businesses from being able to take advantage of a federal tax break law. This is known as decoupling, and business groups across the state are fighting it. The governor says that is all he and Madigan talked about.
Well, you know, it's the responsibility of the governor to work with the leaders, both parties, and their caucuses. Did I ask him to step down? No, I was in a conversation about getting things done. He is still the speaker now. We're trying to get decoupling done during this lame duck.
Lame duck as in these are the final days that outgoing or lame duck legislators have in office, often a time when controversial bills can sail through the General Assembly. Now, we didn't see the House doing much of that yet today. That's because the real action was happening in private meetings as Democrats strategized and talked about who could win in that speaker's race. But the Senate was busy all day, including passing a Chicago Teachers Union bill that gives the CTU more collective bargaining power. A law restricting what CPS teachers can bargain over has been in place since the mid-90s. Republican Senator Dale Ryder says it was enacted because of what he called CTU's prolific tendency to go on strike.
That's the issue here. The reason the 1995 law was put in place was because the Chicago public schools at the time were an unmitigated disaster for parents and students. That's what prompted the reform. That's what prompted the reform. To undo that is asking to go back to those ways, and that is an enormous mistake.
But State Senator Selena Villanueva says Central Illinois legislators have no business talking like that about CPS. She says she is a graduate and knows firsthand what goes on in Chicago classrooms.
How dare we say that they don't have the right to bargain over something that is literally standing on equity, which is classroom sizes for Black and brown children in the city of Chicago? Or having social workers in schools, when we already know the mental health effects, even before the pandemic, the mental health effects on Black and brown children in this country.
Now, lawmakers also got started moving on a major package that's been promoted by Black legislators. Senator Kim Lightford noted the historic nature of their agenda and her own role as the first Black woman to be a majority leader in the Senate.
And too often labeled as the angry Black woman for simply fighting systemic racist policies in our state's education system, for equity and fairness for all children to receive a quality education.
Now, voting is set to continue into the evening. The House just a bit ago in this hour beginning to take up that education bill promoted by the Black Caucus. Now, as for security, Governor Pritzker says that the state police are aware of the movement for protests at state capitals nationwide, but he would not go into security details. And Brandis, with that, back to you.
Amanda, thank you. For the first time in 10 months, some Chicago public school students returned to the classroom today. Pre-K and special education cluster program students were the first groups given the option for in-person learning, a move pushed for by the school district and Mayor Lori Lightfoot.
To deny these students and their parents the option, let me underscore, the option to get back into this in-person learning environment and to address some of the challenges that they have faced remotely. That would be wrong.
But the reopening comes amidst scathing criticism from the Chicago Teachers Union and many city council members who say it is not yet safe for students and staff to return to school buildings. Joining us with more are Alderwoman Maria Haddon, whose 49th ward includes most of Rogers Park on the far north side, and Alderman George Cardenas, whose 12th ward includes McKinley Park on Chicago's southwest side. Welcome both of you back to Chicago tonight. Alderwoman Haddon, you say it is too soon for CPS students to return to school. What would be the threshold at which you think it would be safe for students to come back to their buildings?
That's a great question, Brandis, and I think that's actually one of my biggest concerns is that we're not getting clear metrics on what that threshold is. I agree that we need to have children in schools. This is the best environment for them to learn. But even in our hearing today, there's no set positivity rate. They say that's discredited. They say we're focusing on this doubling. But when pressed of asking what is that metric and how did we pick today, we're still not getting clear answers from CPS.
Alderman Cardenas, do you think that students can return safely to their school buildings?
Well, I mean, they have returned. So let's take that for what it is. I think there's a lot to be said on both sides. I'm listening. I've been listening. I just got out of a meeting from that I've had teachers just pointedly tell me that they're afraid, that they're concerned, that the metrics don't line up. And I understand their frustration. I do believe them. It's not that I don't. I've also had parents that want their kids back in school. They have no options, and I'm hearing them as well. I think the truth, someone's in the middle, but I cannot discount the teachers, the ones that fear for their lives and the lives of their families. And we got to take that into consideration as well. We cannot be blind to that and punish them by not paying them, if you will, if they don't show up, would not be right either. So, I'm here to work it out. I've been listening and I've been talking to CPS and the leaders and the administration as well. I've been here a long time. The way to get things done is by working together on solutions that affect Chicagoans and, more importantly, our communities, my constituents. And that's what I plan to do. And I visited all the schools, most of the schools, and they have all the PPE. The principals are ready, but there's many teachers that are not emotionally ready, and that's what we have to talk about.
So last month, we spoke with a parent of a special education cluster student who planned to send her son back to school today. Here's what she said.
For my son, and I think for most kids in his program, school is his whole world. It's where not only does he get academic education, it's where he gets social skills, it's where he gets social interaction, it's where he gets emotional well-being.
Alderwoman Haddon, what do you say then to the parents who say that remote learning is not working for them, which CPS says is the case, that it's not working for a large majority of pre-K and special education students? What do you say to those parents who feel like they need this option?
I say that I agree with the mayor in that we owe them this option. The question isn't, should this be option or should we work to get back in the classrooms? It's, are we ready? And I would argue when 64% of principals, 63% of CPS families in our city, the overwhelming majority of teachers as well, and I think we're up to 52 local school councils say the plan and the date is not right. We're not ready. But that just means for right now. I can say here in the 49th Ward, we had cluster program students going back today at Sullivan High School. And of the 49 students that were eligible to go back, only 10 of them opted in responding to that survey. And I just have concerns about a lot of our principals and the teachers and the people who are those students' whole world not having an adequate voice in the planning of this reopening.
Alderman Cardenas, CPS says that they've invested $100 million in safety measures like filters, personal protective equipment. You say you've spoken with a number of teachers. You say you've also visited schools. And you're among the handful of aldermen who did not sign onto a letter that many aldermen sent to the district questioning its reopening plan. Do you think the district has done enough to make it safe for schools to reopen as they did today?
Look, I think there's a lot of schools that are old that need more than just PPE. And I think that's probably, at the end of the day, at the crux of the problem, the fact that we need to update our schools significantly to make them safer, even before pandemic. So I can only imagine their fear of being in places that are just not up to date, to be truthful. So I understand that. And I haven't signed on that letter, and I've been, going through what I usually do, which is go through the community and understand the issue before I sign on to anything. But I will sign on to the letter only because out of respect for the many people, the many teachers that are concerned, and I don't want them to feel that somehow that's discounted. But but I also want them to understand that there's a lot of parents that want to be in school. They want their children to be in school, and we ought to respect that choice as well. And we ought to give them options. We ought to help those parents and children that are completely off the grid. And that's not fair either. And so we got to come together to find those solutions. So I am all in on all of that. And I don't want to disrespect anybody, but I want us to recognize that there's needs on both spectrums, and we got to come to the middle.
We've got about 20 seconds left, Alderwoman Haddon, but the City Council today, you all participated in an hours-long hearing, or subject matter hearing on this reopening. Is there anything that aldermen and/or the City Council can do about the reopening?
I think it's our responsibility, and I'll continue to lift up the voices of our constituents, our residents, our CPS families, our students, the teachers and support staff. We, asked very good questions today that really got to the heart of readiness and the concerns that we're hearing from our residents. And that's what I'm going to continue to do, and what I think our City Council needs to continue to do.
Okay, Alderwoman Maria Haddon and Alderman George Cardenas, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for the invite.
Up next, a wrap-up of the Chicago Bears season with James Big Cat Williams. Stick around.
We can get past the idea of turning this into a political topic and really get to serving our communities. That's something I can get behind.
Maybe we can use this as a calling card to unite.
There's still a lot more news ahead, including details on major upgrades to the CTA's Red Line. But first, the Chicago Bears find themselves in a familiar position on the outside looking in as the NFL playoffs progress toward the Super Bowl. A listless 21-9 loss capped off a season of mediocrity, backing into the 7th playoff seed. And now it's time for the familiar refrain of where does this franchise go from here? Joining us now with more is former Chicago Bears offensive lineman James Big Cat Williams. Big Cat, great to see you. So why such an anemic performance on offense, do you think?
I don't know, Paris. You look at that game and the things that they had the opportunity to do, they just didn't take advantage of. I think we saw them a couple weeks earlier, granted versus not as high standard of defense as you saw with the Saints, but you saw them be able to move the ball a little bit, be able to run the ball, be able to run the play action, the bootlegs. And it just seemed like they went into the Saints game knowing they had to do more, but not wanting to build off of the things that they had already started to get a little bit better at.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the running game wasn't working, and it had worked really well much of the last few weeks of the season. In the first quarter, Javon Wims dropped that sure touchdown pass on that little flea flicker. How gutting was that?
Oh, it was gutting because, it's the old phrase that you always hear, you never let a bad team stick around. And for the Bears, unfortunately, they were that bad team. If they were able to complete that pass for a touchdown, now they're in the game. Now your emotions are running high. The possibilities are endless. But dropping a pass like that, which is almost like it was the last bullet in their gun.
It was just, it was a perfect throw. We're watching all the replays here. I mean, just right through his arms.
Right in the bucket.
Yeah, so I mean,
right in the bucket.
Right in the bucket. So that wasn't on Trubisky. How do you think he played overall? And what's the verdict here? It's always up, down. We're 4 years into Trubisky. What do we think?
I would have liked to see more out of him in this playoff game. I think that not only for the Bears, but for his own personal growth as far as whether another team is going to look at him after this, he could have done it so much better. You watched, the Rams game, you watched the Washington game, and the Rams game, Goff, who wasn't even supposed to play with a broken thumb that he just had repaired, and then the Heineke kid from Washington. These guys were giving it all they had, and it just didn't look like Mitch was giving you all that. When you talk about the 4th down and 4 play where he runs out of bounds, everybody's looking to you. You've got to try and run that cornerback over.
Do you think the Bears try to make a move in free agency for another quarterback next year? There's reports that Deshaun Watson wants out of Houston, but that would be incredibly costly. What do you think?
I mean, I don't know. You know, salary cap is going to have a lot to play into it. You know, Deshaun Watson, yes. You look at Stafford, who's going to be possibly coming out of Detroit. Now, they would not trade him to an in-conference rival, but, you know, there are players out there that are going to be coming out. You've got Cam Newton. You've got Phillip Rivers, who no one knows whether he's going to stay in Indy or not. You know, there are guys out there, but, you know, it's all about what kind of deal can you make and how bad would it cripple the Bears money-wise as far, you know, trying to get a deal like that done.
Especially in a year where you didn't have fans, so you didn't get all that revenue. So what about the futures of the head coach, Nagy, and the general manager, Pace, who have been on the hot seat?
I mean, that's what we're all waiting on. You know, it's Monday and you haven't heard anything yet. So I would suspect that both of them will be back. I mean, after COVID season and all the things they had to deal with as far as meetings being online and not being able to be in facilities all the time, having rookie players come in and just have to start from scratch. You know, that's a lot to put on a team and a coach. So I could see where they would extend this for one more year and see how it goes. But, you know, there are no guarantees.
And then on the player level, we talked about quarterback. What else do the Bears need to do in the offseason to make this a playoff caliber team?
Well, you got to figure that the defense is, and I think we saw it towards the end of the season and in the playoff game, they're getting a little long in the tooth. Age is starting to become a factor, but I think you should be able to get one more good season out of, you know, your big name players. And if you can do that, if you can put a viable offense on the field, if you can shore up the quarterback position, get yourself another running back, take care of the offensive line. It just sounds like so much that needs to be done going into the next season that I don't know if they're going to have the resources to take care of everything that they need.
And it feels like we have this discussion after every year. You know, the NFL tried this thing by broadcasting on Nickelodeon for kids with all these crazy graphics. What do you think of this whole effort to juice it up for kids?
I love it. I love it. I love the fact that they're broadening their horizons and, you know, going on to Nick and doing a broadcast. I flipped over and watched it a couple times. And, you know, I think Nick Burleson was one of the guys doing the broadcasting. And to hear him explain everything and break everything down into layman's terms for the kids to understand, it was kind of unique to watch. And I think they should do more of it. I think it should be maybe a Thursday night game or, you know, a game that not everybody's going to want to be watching the national televised broadcasters.
I know, a way to bring a new generation of fans in and really have them understand the game. All right, Big Cat, sorry to say that I guess we won't see you until at least late next August. So thank you as always and have a great 2021.
Thanks, Paris. You too, man.
All right. And now, Brandis, back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight. The Chicago Tribune says it's moving its newsroom out of Prudential Plaza less than 3 years after moving there. Where to now? The president's Twitter account is suspended. What role do social media companies have in regulating speech on their platforms?
2021 is a big year for CTA and the Red Purple Modernization Project.
The CTA says the bypass aimed at alleviating congestion where the red, purple, and brown lines meet should go into use this summer. And the struggles some Chicago public school families say they're facing due to language barriers and tech problems. But first, some more of today's top stories. A deadly coronavirus outbreak at the state veterans home in LaSalle has led the state's director of Veterans Affairs to step down. News that Linda Chapalavia was being replaced came after she spoke at a hearing held by House members just this morning.
So it is very, very important that you understand when the positivity rose in LaSalle, our veterans had no chance. They had absolutely no chance. The people who care for our heroes in their homes live within those communities they serve. When community spread is high, staff can fall prey to this virus, no matter how conscientious they are about following protocols that we direct them to do.
An outbreak at the LaSalle Veterans Home took the lives of at least 36 residents between November and December last year. State Senator Sue Rezin, whose district includes the Veterans Home, says LaVia's removal was inevitable, but thinks the governor should have removed her sooner. The governor's office says Major General Peter Nazamis will become the interim VA director. He's currently the Assistant Adjutant General of the Illinois Air National Guard. Coronavirus complications have canceled tomorrow's NBA game between the Bulls and the Celtics. This brings the total number of NBA games canceled to 4 after a Sunday game between Miami and Boston was called off because of contact tracing issues with the Heat. Both teams would have been short several players because of issues with either the coronavirus or injuries. The league and the players' union met today to modify the league's health and safety protocols. Developing news out of Indonesia as officials try to understand what caused the crash of a Boeing jet this weekend. The Chicago Tribune makes another move, and Chicago's snack brand Vintners gets attention from an East Coast company. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business reporter A.D. Quigg. Welcome back, A.D. So this Saturday, we know that a jet from Chicago-based Boeing was carrying 62 people when it went down just minutes after takeoff in Indonesia. Search and rescue teams have located the crash site, but they still don't know what caused that crash. But what do we know about the Boeing aircraft and the pilots?
Right, so this is not the Boeing 737 MAX that we've been hearing about for the past couple years that was involved in a series of crashes. This is a 737-500 model. It's a much older plane, meaning it's less likely to be a design fault. This has been described as a workhorse plane. So we also know these pilots were highly experienced, had good safety records, and the carrier has a solid safety history too. From radar tracking data, the plane leveled off at 10,000 feet for 3 minutes, then made a rapid drop into the Java Sea in just 15 seconds. There are some reports that the pilots may have been disoriented. There also could have been problems with the instruments for weather. We'll know a lot more once we have the black boxes in hand. But this is big for Boeing. The 737 MAX had just started flying again in December after being grounded for 2 years. So this is just another big blow for the company on top of the impact of COVID.
What a tragic crash. So we also know that the Chicago Tribune says it is moving its newsroom from Prudential Plaza after being there for just less than 3 years. Where is it going now?
So they're moving to the Freedom Center printing facility, which folks might know as the big red brick building on the northern branch of the Chicago River. So they will move at the end of January. Obviously, the folks who do printing, packaging, delivering the paper have been working there for years, but most of the folks on the reporting side have not been in the office since March at Prudential. A memo to Trib employees says it'll help reorganize the company's physical footprint as they keep navigating the pandemic. Before that, they were, of course, at Trib Tower, which is being converted to luxury condos.
Okay, and Chicago snack brand Vintners is being sold for $25 million. Who's this buyer and what's significant about this purchase, aside from, you know, if you're hungry, you need to know?
Right, so the buyer is Utz, which a lot of folks might know. They're based out of Hanover, Pennsylvania. They will get the trademark. They will get a big foothold in the Midwest at a time when comfort food sales are going through the roof, big time during the pandemic. Vintner has a good network of distribution routes here. It first got started on the city's south side in 1926. Chicago's the 4th biggest salty snack market in the country. This is just another big acquisition for Utz. They already own a bunch of other familiar brands like On the Border, Boulder Canyon, and Zapp's.
Okay, 4th biggest snack market in the country. That's a fun fact about Chicago.
Yeah, I'm contributing to that trend.
Likewise, my friend. A.D. Quigg, good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Good to see you.
And now to Paris for a look at free speech and social media. Paris.
Brandis, President Trump is no longer allowed to post on several social media platforms. First, Facebook and Instagram banned the president's accounts at least until the end of his term. Then Twitter permanently suspended his account due to the risk of further incitement of violence after January 6th. So what role do social media companies have in regulating speech on their platforms? Joining us to talk about that are Genevieve Lakier, an assistant professor of law with the University of Chicago Law School, and Sinan Aro, the David Austin Professor of Management, Marketing, and IT at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Welcome, both of you. First, Genevieve, your reaction to the permanent suspension Twitter and the indefinite suspension on all those other platforms.
As a free speech person, my reaction is mixed. So on the one hand, I understand why the decision was made. It seems clear in the wake of the invasion of the Capitol that Trump's tweets were responsible, did encourage violence, and there's lots of evidence that there are future violent actions being planned or being contemplated. So I completely understand why Twitter and Facebook and the other platforms did what they did. On the other hand, the fact that they had the power to mute the voice of maybe the most powerful person in the world does make clear the enormous power that these private for-profit companies wield. And so going forward, I think this is a good moment for us to think about whether there should be a conversation about how these private companies should be using their power.
And Sinan, there's also Parler, which a lot of far-right conservatives flocked to after the Twitter ban, and it's been known to have some very violent posts, and it effectively got shut down because other companies choosing not to carry them. Explain Parler and explain how that works.
Yeah, so Parler is run by a CEO called John Matzey, and he has made it clear that he will not moderate the platform. That's, in fact, its differentiating calling card, if you will. He is supportive of any and all kind of speech on Parler. And what you saw after the bans was that key conservative voices that some consider fringe, but that have a large following like Mark Levine or Rush Limbaugh, they voluntarily suspended their own Twitter accounts and said, hey, everyone join me on Parler and Rumble and so on. And so the danger there is that you get a splintering of the information ecosystem where you have conservatives following Donald Trump and Mark Levine and Rush Limbaugh to a separate network, and those in the more liberal side remaining on the mainstream Facebook and Twitter. And any student of negotiation knows that the key to collaboration, cooperation, empathy is common ground. And if you have two bifurcated networks that are seeing completely different realities, that are not speaking to each other at all, that are moderated differently, then you can imagine that it'll become very difficult to have a civil society with civil discourse.
And we kind of touched on that a little earlier. Genevieve, conservatives are fuming right now that there's some First Amendment issues here, even though Twitter, Facebook, they're private companies, that this is no government suppressing any kind of speech. It's private companies acting the way they're allowed to in the free market. Is there any kind of First Amendment or legal issue here?
No, I mean, there is a certain irony here, because it is true that in the early 20th century, when the courts were just developing the modern First Amendment law, there are some cases that suggest that private property owners, when they operate a sufficiently important forum for public speech, we might imagine constitutional duties might apply to them. But conservatives hated those rulings. And since the 70s, since we've had a more conservative Supreme Court, the court has made clear that there's a very strict divide. The First Amendment applies only to government actors. It doesn't apply to private companies. And so it's just interesting now to hear conservative voices criticizing the very strong division between the public and the private that their own conservative Supreme Court has imposed.
So it seems like, I was just going to say, it seems like conservatives have done a 180 then in the last several decades on their views on this issue. Sinan, do you believe that technology companies, it was Amazon, it was Google and Apple that basically forced Parler off of their platforms. Do a few technology companies have too much power here? I mean, is there maybe a monopoly issue in the tech world?
Well, I mean, I definitely think that we need more competition in the social media economy. I think that having competition is going to be the essential incentive creating force that forces these platforms to embrace society's values rather than just pursuing profit motive. When we have a choice to choose between platforms and one provides us privacy, one provides us better content moderation so that we don't see things like live streaming of mass murders like in Christchurch, New Zealand, and so on, we'll gravitate towards those. But if we don't have that choice, then they don't have the incentive to work hard to provide that better service. Now, the question is, how do you create competition? In my opinion, the antitrust case against Facebook is not going to be sufficient to create competition. You actually need structural reforms of the social media economy itself. And the reason for that is because the economy runs on network effects, which means that it tends towards market concentration. If you break up the market leader, it will just tip the next Facebook-like company into market dominance. What we need is interoperability legislation, data and social network portability legislation, and we have those acts sitting in front of Congress. The Access Act right now would require any social media company greater than 100 million users to become interoperable. Can you imagine not being able to make a cell phone call from Sprint to Verizon? When we instituted number portability in the cell phone market, it created consumer surplus and competition for years and years and years. When we forced
I'm sorry, we only have a few seconds here. I wanted to get Genevieve in here. Just very quickly, how do you balance the need to have a freedom of speaking on these platforms with their use by leaders maliciously for propaganda, for disinformation?
Well, I agree, actually, that we need kind of structural reform of the social media platforms, and it's not going to happen naturally. But I'm not so sure that interoperability or breaking them up is going to be enough. Because there still is this question out there about what kind of speech do we allow to flow on these platforms. And even if only Parler has this really harmful and problematic speech, it can still create all kinds of damage down the road. And so I'm hopeful that what has happened is going to spark interest in a long-range conversation about how do we regulate speech in these platforms? What is harmful speech? What is permissible speech? I think it's beginning. But on my view, the platforms need buy-in from a lot of other groups. It cannot just be Facebook and Twitter making these decisions for themselves. There needs to be a richer conversation, maybe with...
All right, I'm sorry, Genevieve. I have to leave it there. It's a long discussion that we're going to be having for many years, I believe. And our thanks to Genevieve Lakier and Sinan Arl. Thanks so much. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. If you ride the rails or just drive or walk by the train on the north side, you may be watching the progress of the CTA's overhaul of the red and purple lines. This month, crews are putting into place a major piece of that redevelopment effort. And as Chicago Tonight's Nick Blumberg reports, passengers will start to see the benefits of the project later this year.
The $2.1 billion Phase 1 of the red-purple modernization kicked off in 2018. It's an effort to overhaul miles of tracks and stations of the century-old L.
It's beyond its useful life. It just needs to be fully rehabilitated.
Old tracks mean trains can't travel as fast, causing delays throughout the CTA's system. Major work started in October 2019.
With the construction of a new red-purple bypass that is basically going to decongest, if you will, train traffic at the red, purple, and brown line intersection north of Belmont Station.
The CTA made major progress on the bypass last year, installing the columns and foundations for the bridge. This month, crews will install the piece that connects those columns as well as the steel girders the CTA describes as the backbone of the bypass.
We will basically be building the section of the bypass that goes over red and purple line tracks. So when that work is done later in January, people will actually be able to ride underneath the bypass for the first time if they're on a red or purple line train.
As for when that bypass goes into service, right now the CTA is estimating it'll be ready this summer. Set to open this spring, temporary red line stations at Argyle and Bryn Mawr.
Those stations are well underway. In fact, they're visible to anybody walking or driving by. And those will open simultaneous with the 4 stations closing for reconstruction.
Those 4 stations, Bryn Mawr, Berwyn, Argyle, and Lawrence, covering parts of Edgewater and Uptown, are set to be totally rebuilt, and it goes far beyond the cosmetic.
We have stations that are not accessible to our customers with disability issues. So with this project, we are rebuilding stations that they will have elevators and they will be able to accommodate mobility devices.
In addition to new stations, the CTA will also be rebuilding major sections of track along the same stretch. With construction expected to run through 2024, the CTA says it wants to be proactive about reaching out to riders, neighbors, and business owners.
We have hundreds of businesses within the RPM footprint, the Red Purple Modernization footprint, and they're all notably, understandably concerned, even prior to the pandemic. You know, how are people going to get to my business? Am I going to be okay?
So the CTA launched its Open for Business program, with online and in-person promotional efforts for local shops and restaurants. The agency and its contractor Walsh Floor also say they've worked to hire people from disadvantaged neighborhoods, held career fairs, and launched a scholarship for CPS students interested in engineering and construction.
We believe that this project should benefit everyone, not just people who use those stations or necessarily ride those train lines.
And while Chase acknowledges the overhaul will sometimes cause delays, closures, or impacts around stations and tracks, she says it's a critical project for Chicago's future.
The Red Line is the backbone of the city, right? It's been here 100 years, and we need it to continue for another 100 years.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Nick Blumberg.
If you're planning on taking the CTA this coming weekend, train service will again be replaced by shuttle buses between Addison and Belmont for work on the bypass from Friday at 10 p.m. until Monday at 4 p.m. And now to WTTW News Director and host of Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, Hugo Balta, for a look at the struggles some CPS families are facing due to language and tech barriers in a conversation that first aired over the weekend.
Since Chicago Public Schools were shuttered for in-school learning last spring, the move to remote learning has been a struggle for many families. And for the CPS families whose home language is Spanish, there's been an additional barrier. In a December article for Borderless magazine, Chicago reporter Amaris Rodriguez spoke with families who say CPS has not done enough to get their children ready for online learning, nor have they done enough to help the Spanish-speaking teachers who have taken on tech support for those families. And joining us now to talk about her article is freelance reporter and general assignment reporter for Journal and Topics newspaper, Amaris Rodriguez. Amaris, nearly half of CPS students are Latino. About how many families are affected by this issue, and how have they been figuring things out?
I think that a lot of families that are Hispanic, and especially in primarily Spanish-speaking households, have been affected by e-learning and the lack of support that was given, especially in managing technology. And from talking to teachers and from talking to families, it seems that families that had younger students were the ones that had the hardest time. Families have had to try to navigate and find help on their own, whether it's contacting tech support and being sent to someone else, whether it's having to try and learn it themselves or use a translator. It's definitely something that has affected a lot of Spanish-speaking families.
Now, CPS did offer some resources for Spanish-speaking families, but these families say it wasn't enough. What more do they think CPS should have done?
CPS did a good job, as a lot of their students are Spanish-speaking, so there was definitely a knowledge that the information that they had to be put out in various languages, not just Spanish. I think that what happened was that there wasn't enough consideration into the technology generational gap that a lot of Hispanic families experience, especially first generation. So the lack of support and the lack of teaching older parents how to navigate the technology is what kind of caused that step back and what hindered the students' abilities in order to log into e-learning, to complete their assignments, to check their grades. That seemed to be where the parents were having the largest struggle.
In your article, teacher Nidia Carranza expressed her wishes for more teachers of color like herself to address these types of issues. Based on your reporting, does CPS have a diversity problem?
I don't believe that CPS has a diversity problem from talking to the teachers and talking to the parents. I think that what was the issue was just that there was a plan, but the execution behind it was not there. CPS has a lot of teachers of color. They have a lot of bilingual teachers, which is something another of the teachers, Husna Kidway, talked about a lot. They have a strong bilingual program, but the teachers were not offered the support to be able to provide their services to families.
Another problem you report is CPS directing families to individual schools and teachers for tech support. How much of a burden does this present for the teachers you spoke with?
It presents a big burden for the teachers that we spoke with. Teachers are having to navigate this world of e-learning, having to try to switch their courses and their teaching schedules to a way that would be able to actually be doable for students and to meet them where they are. So having to add tech help to their support, to the support that they offer students, is definitely adding, it's taking away time that they can dedicate to try and help students navigate this.
You met with a CPS student, Estrella Figueroa, who's juggling many responsibilities to keep herself and her siblings afloat at school. Can you tell us a little bit about her story?
Estrella's story is very powerful, and I think it speaks a lot to what a lot of first generation young students are going through, especially right now with e-learning. So her story is that she is the oldest, she's the second oldest, I'm sorry, and she has a lot of younger siblings that she is responsible for not only her e-learning as well as theirs. So it's managing her schoolwork, making sure her siblings are logged in, and then on top of that, during her break, after school hours, she goes and she helps her mom at her job, which is a fruit stand. So it's a 14-year-old trying to navigate a lot of different things that kids are just not prepared for.
A lot of challenges that students, families, teachers are going to have to iron out as we now are entering the second half of the school year. Amaris Rodriguez, thank you very much for your time and for your insights.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Again, that was WTTW News Director and host Ugo Balta in a conversation first aired this past week on our program, Chicago Tonight Latino Voices, which you can catch Saturday evenings at 6 on WTTW. And that's our show for this Monday night.
Please join us tomorrow night live at 7.
Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe. Good evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm, sponsoring a free continuing legal education program for over a decade for lawyers across the state.